An old man stood alone on a hill overlooking what remained of Rome. But even that sentence felt too generous for what his eyes now saw. The city below was no longer the beating heart of an empire. It was a shell pretending to remember its former life. Marcus, once a general whose orders had moved legions across continents, now stood in silence as wind moved through broken stone and empty forums. The rusted coin in his hand felt heavier than gold ever had, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, a promise that had slowly lost its meaning over centuries. He did not feel anger anymore. Anger required belief. What he felt now was something colder, clarity. Rome was never supposed to fall, he whispered, not as a statement of truth, but as a confession of disbelief he had carried for too long. Then his voice lowered into something almost human. And yet I watched it happen, one piece at a time. And as that thought settled, the past did not return gently. It came like a battlefield reopening. Marcus was a child then, standing at the edge of a crowded street in a Rome that still believed itself eternal. The empire at its peak was not just powerful, it was confident in its permanence. The streets were alive with merchants, soldiers, senators, and travelers from lands Marcus could not even name yet. The first time he saw a legion march through the capital, it did not feel like a military display. It felt like reality itself moving in perfect order. His father lifted him onto his shoulders so he could see better, and as the ground trembled beneath synchronized footsteps, he whispered the words that would shape Marcus's entire life. This is Rome. It does not fall. Everything else does. That belief became the foundation of everything Marcus would later become. As a young recruit, Marcus entered training not with fear, but with devotion. The Roman military academy stripped boys of softness with deliberate brutality. Days began before sunrise and ended after bodies had already given up. He learned to march with armor that bruised his shoulders, to fight through exhaustion that blurred vision, and to obey commands even when instinct screamed otherwise. But beneath the discipline, something more dangerous was forming inside him: certainty. He believed suffering was not a cost, but an investment in eternity. His first battlefield deployment destroyed that illusion without ceremony. There was no heroic speech, no dramatic arrival of destiny. There was only mud, cold air, and men screaming in languages that meant nothing to each other. Marcus remembered slipping on wet ground as shields clashed and arrows fell without discrimination. A soldier beside him, barely older than himself, was struck and fell without even a chance to speak. That moment should have shaken him, but instead it confused him. If Rome was eternal, why did eternity feel so fragile here? He buried that question quickly. Rome did not allow doubt, at least not yet. Years later, Marcus was sent beyond the heart of the empire into provinces where Rome felt less like governance and more like expectation. Roads that once symbolized unity were now uneven paths of neglect. Governors collected taxes for Rome, but kept a portion for themselves. Marcus witnessed a provincial official openly demand bribes in exchange for food supplies meant for soldiers. When confronted, the official smiled and said, "Rome is too far to care about this place." That sentence stayed with Marcus longer than any battle wound. It was during these years he met Lucius. Lucius was young, energetic, and dangerously optimistic. He believed in Rome the way Marcus once had, without hesitation. They met after a border skirmish, where Lucius had fought with reckless courage that bordered on self-destruction. Marcus saw himself in the boy, but also something he no longer possessed: unbroken belief. Lucius spoke constantly of honor and future victories, of returning to Rome as a decorated hero. Marcus never corrected him. Instead, he listened, as if preserving innocence had become a duty. One night, After a brutal engagement with a Germanic raiding party, Marcus found Lucius sitting alone beside a dying fire. The battlefield behind them was silent in the way only mass death can create. Lucius spoke quietly, asking why victories always felt smaller than the cost. Marcus hesitated before answering. Because you're beginning to see the empire from its edges, he said, and edges are where things begin to fall apart. Lucius looked at him and asked, "Does Rome know it is falling apart?" Marcus had no answer that would not feel like betrayal. Meanwhile, inside Rome itself, something darker was unfolding. Political life had become a theater of survival rather than governance. Emperors rose not through legacy, but through alliances that lasted only until the next betrayal. Marcus received reports of a general who declared himself emperor overnight, only to be assassinated by his own guards weeks later. Another emperor ordered the execution of senators suspected of disloyalty, only to be overthrown by the very men who carried out his orders. Marcus began to understand that power in Rome no longer stabilized the empire, it destabilized everything around it. In one particularly disturbing meeting with a visiting senator, Marcus was asked to support a political claim to the throne. The senator spoke not of Rome, but of control. When Marcus refused, the senator leaned closer and said softly, "Rome is not an idea anymore. It is a weapon, and weapons belong to whoever holds them." That sentence marked a shift Marcus could not ignore. Rome was no longer a shared belief. It was becoming a tool. The economic decay deepened this fracture. Marcus was stationed in a provincial market when he witnessed a soldier attempt to buy basic food supplies. The merchant weighed the coin, frowned, and handed it back. "This has been reduced again," he said. Across the empire, currency was being debased quietly by rulers desperate to fund wars and political campaigns. Soldiers were still paid, but their pay lost meaning with each passing year. Inflation did not arrive with collapse, it arrived with adaptation. People adjusted, tolerated, then slowly stopped trusting the system altogether. Marcus saw this distrust reflected in his own soldiers. Conversations in the camps no longer revolved around Rome's glory, but around survival, pay, and loyalty to specific commanders. Rome was no longer the center of identity. It was becoming background noise. The pressure at the borders intensified during these years. Germanic tribes did not attack as a unified force, but as constant waves, probing, retreating, learning. Marcus fought in one such campaign where the enemy used Roman tactics against them, suggesting not just aggression but adaptation. After the battle, Marcus studied the fallen and realized something unsettling. Rome was no longer the only civilization capable of learning. His rise to general came not through triumph, but through necessity. During a northern campaign, Roman forces were ambushed in terrain that negated their traditional formations. The chain of command collapsed under confusion. Marcus took control instinctively, reorganizing scattered units into defensive positions. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, neither side had truly won, but Rome had survived. For survival, Marcus was promoted. Yet promotion brought clarity rather than pride. From his new position, Marcus saw the empire as a fragile network of competing interests. Governors ignored central command. Generals prioritized personal armies over imperial unity. Provinces acted like semi-independent states under the illusion of shared identity. Rome was still spoken of as one empire, but in practice, it had already become many. Then came the division. The empire was split into Eastern and Western administrations. Officially, it was described as efficiency. Unofficially, Marcus understood it as containment. 2 capitals meant 2 centers of power. 2 armies meant divided strength. 2 visions meant fractured destiny. When he received the decree, Marcus did not react immediately. Instead, he sat alone in his quarters for hours, realizing that what had once been unimaginable had now become policy. It was around this time that Lucius changed. The boy who once spoke of honor began speaking of loyalty to commanders rather than Rome itself. One evening, Marcus confronted him after hearing him declare allegiance to a rising warlord rather than the empire. Lucius defended himself, saying Rome no longer protected them, so survival required flexibility. Marcus felt something inside him fracture, not anger, but grief. "You were supposed to believe in Rome," he said quietly. Lucius replied, "Rome stopped believing in us first." The psychological breaking point came during a northern engagement where Marcus witnessed hesitation spread through Roman ranks for the first time. Soldiers did not flee, but they did not advance either. They waited, calculating, doubting. That hesitation was more dangerous than any enemy weapon. Marcus realized that Rome no longer commanded automatic obedience. Fear, once Rome's greatest weapon, had begun to fade. And then came the sack. When news reached Marcus that Rome itself had been breached, he refused to accept it. But denial collapsed under reality as he traveled toward the capital. What he saw was not just destruction, it was absence. The city that had once defined civilization was now a landscape of broken stone and silence. Marcus walked through streets where emperors once passed in triumph, now reduced to ash and memory. In the ruins, he found a fragment of a soldier's helmet and realized that even symbols were no longer safe from time. But the most devastating realization came not in destruction, but in understanding. Rome had not fallen because of one enemy. It had fallen because it had slowly stopped being one thing. Unity had fractured into politics. Trust had decayed into suspicion. Currency had dissolved into manipulation. Identity had scattered into survival. Each change had been small enough to ignore, but together they had rewritten history. In his final years, Marcus withdrew from command. He no longer led armies, because there were no armies left to lead in the way he once understood them. He returned to the place where he had once believed in Rome's eternity. The field was empty now, untouched except by wind.